Hello and welcome back, and that is right. In today's video I'm going to show you the difference between the Jonsbo N2 and the Jonsbo N3. I know a number of you are thinking, you're watching this thinking, well, it's bloody obvious, that one's bigger than that one, that holds 8 bays. But you know what? There's actually quite a lot of differences between these two systems, and I found 7 incredibly important differences between the Jonsbo N2 and the Jonsbo N3, and that doesn't even include the price, by the way. And throughout this video I'm going to go through every single one of them, and each of these may be the difference between going for this one or this one. But before we go any further, a few disclaimers straight off the bat.
Oh shit, here we go again.
The Jonsbo N2 I've got here next to me is the Jonsbo that we use for our 100k subscriber special celebration. It is already pre-built, it's got a TopTon board inside, and I could dismantle it and have both of these chassis empty, but I'm already utilising this in other videos, so I apologise in advance when we're comparing these that this one is empty and this one is already pre-built. Second thing I will also highlight is this is completely empty. It weighs virtually nothing, and that is because this is getting ready for our Jonsbo N3 build that's going to come eventually. We've already done kind of a hardware peer into this device, and this is going to be the comparison, but don't worry, the Jonsbo N3 is going to happen as a build here on the channel. And finally, when it comes to the price difference between these two, I haven't got a bleeding clue. Depending on what store you look at online, even the N2 that's been around for about 18 months and the Jonsbo N3 that's been around for maybe 2 months at best in terms of retail, there is such inconsistent pricing, it is unreal. And although I can definitely confirm that the N3 is somewhere between 30 and 50 quid more than that of the N2, the actual pricing, depending on whether you go to Amazon, Aliexpress, Newegg, or any of your third 2-bit websites out there on the internet, the pricing is all over the place. But I'll say right now, if one of the things you're interested in is which one's cheaper, the N2 is cheaper. But that's not even one of my 7 points. So let's crack on with number 1.
Phenomenal cosmic powers!
That's right, let's get the bleeding obvious one out of the way. The number of bays. This device, the N3, arrives with 8 individual bays that can be partially or fully populated for hot swapping when needed. All SATA, supporting both SATA and SAS drives, I might add, due to the combined SATA-SAS connector. Now the N2, on the other hand, arrives with 5 bays of storage inside there, and it also has this cavity with this little Allen key that I'm going to touch on later on. But on top of that, they both arrive with a kind of half-screwed 2.5-inch SATA bay inside, which, you know, is there sort of for an OS or for caching, but given both of these support ITX motherboards that tend to arrive with at least 1, but in many cases 2 M.2 NVMe slots, I think that bay inside is kind of casual in what it's going to be utilised, because most of the NAS OS utilisation inside these, or a caching disk, is going to be built on those M2s. Now, again, that means 8+1 and 5+1 bays inside this, and they both use a backplane that we're going to see later on in the video that's got all of those connectors already pre-soldered to the PCB. They're both also powered by 2 Molex connectors coming off the PSU inside, and both of them have got individual fan connectors for those running into that. But for some reason, the N3 also has an additional SATA power on the rear alongside the 2 Molexes. Now, whether that is so you can go 1 Molex, 1 SATA, I'm not sure. There's certainly not enough power coming from a single SATA to power all 8 bays. But when it comes to the storage, if that's what you're really interested in, either on day 1 storage or scaling up storage over time, obviously the N3 is going to be the bigger. We got the obvious point out of the way, but let's crack on with the other 6 arguably more important differences.
Phenomenal cosmic powers!
This next one is a blink and you miss it one, but on the front of the N2, we've got that front panel there that's got USB there, you've got your power button, and you've got an audio in and out, and on the other one, you've got exactly the same ports, but what you've also got on the N3 is LEDs there on the front. You have got pre-made LEDs running into the F panel that are powered and already pre-connected to the board on the rear. There's a thin cable that runs from the F panel directly into the backplane here on the back of the device, something you'll see later on. Consequently, this immediately taking it out of the box will already have LED identifiers of activity and life and health already available to you and visible there. This system not only doesn't have LED lights on the front, there's not even room for an LCD panel. So if knowing the health of your drives and the activity of your drives at any given moment when you're utilizing the device is important to you and your DIY NAS setup, the N3 certainly brings that advantage to the table.
Phenomenal cosmic powers!
This next one, I couldn't find anyone online highlighting this. Maybe by the time this video goes out, someone else has. But when I was unpacking both of these devices, I realised something. On the base of the N3, you've got these big rubber feet. You've got 4 of them. They're metal on the outside. It's a nice rubber kind of base pad there on the bottom. And again, that's to limit vibrations when the system is in operation and to kind of dissipate that vibration and that energy as it goes on the surface it's on. However, on the N2, you have this enormous silicon pad here. Now, I can't really state at this time, as I mentioned, I've not had the build finished for this yet, whether the individual feet or the large silicon panel makes any notable difference one way or the other in terms of vibration. My instinct, again, TBC, huge quotation marks around it, would be that I think this probably does a better job of dissipating that, because it is a whole silicon rubber panel that is lifted up, I would say about 2 to 3 mil from the base of the chassis to dissipate a lot of those vibrations. Now, if that is true, because once again, that is more of a hunch based on what I'm seeing here, what's really surprising to me is the 5 bay has that, the 5 SATA bays, and not the 8 SATA bay system that is much bigger, which I think would arguably benefit from the better dissipation. Maybe it's a cost thing, maybe it doesn't make any difference at all. But if that's something that interests you, just know that that only arrives on the N2 and is not available on the N3.
Phenomenal cosmic powers!
Ventilation, let's be honest, between these two, because of the extra storage that's going into this in a larger scale, there's going to be differences of ventilation between them. Now, as far as these two are concerned, it's actually 2 main areas of difference between them when it comes to passive and active cooling throughout the system. Now, the N2 features a mesh top panel here, which is directly above the main ITX motherboard that's stored inside here. And again, you've only got clearance inside there for 65mm CPU fans and heatsinks, more on those later on. Consequently, the dissipation, that panel is hugely required, because although the metal is useful for heat dissipation into the air, acting, as an integrated part of the exchange of heat throughout the system, in the case of the N3, they have not put that vent panel there on the top. Now, there may be some of you hearing that going, well, that sounds like a backstep, doesn't it? Why isn't it there? Well, that's because this system's taller and it has a larger cavity to play with, they've redistributed the passive cooling, with the front panel there being a mesh top panel. You can just make it out in this light. So the bottom is that removable mesh panel for the hard drives, and the top is already meshed with those pinholes all the way across, something that is completely absent there on the front of the N2. That is just a flat, irreplaceable panel. But it goes one step further, because although they both got vents there on the side, if we turn around, you make out the other main difference, and that is fans. This system arrives with a single fan here on the rear. So if we remove this, all these thumb screws here, we have a single, quite deep, large fan on the rear of this casing here. Again, it's Jonsbo's own fan there. It's connected via CPU fan connector. It's a very good fan. We've used it. It's a little noisy. I would say definitely switch it out for a Nocta or something. But you've got that fan there. And you've got a little bit of ventilation there to help with the passive distribution of heat coming from the CPU heatsink inside. Now, let's look at that versus this. Because this, on the other hand, arrived with not only 2 fans there on the base, but a huge ventilation panel with screw holes for some additional fans to be installed, which will assist in air being drawn through this system. That is why we don't have that top panel there, because this is being designed to create an active flow of air throughout the course of this system. Now, if we remove the 2 thumb screws here on the base of this system. Put those over there. This has got the dual fan here. So it's got 2 fans rather than 1. They've got their own individual fan for cooling there. They didn't meld it into one. They've both got their own 4-pin connector. And there's already the 2 4-pin ports there inside. But nevertheless, between the 2 of them, there's absolutely no denying that active cooling and passive cooling is arguably better on the N3 overall. And yes, it's a bigger chassis, so it's got more room to play with. But it's not that much bigger. It's only really about an inch deeper and about an inch taller, give or take a little bit there. So between the 2 of them, if cooling and passive cooling is going to be the most important to you, rather than cramming 5 bays of NAS storage into this, you could do exactly the same hardware setup, exactly the same, I might add, every component, but put it in this larger chassis to have a greater density of space for your active and passive cooling at all times.
Phenomenal cosmic powers!
Now, another big difference between these two is to do with the placement of the power supplier inside the PSU, with both of these arriving with the support of SFX power supplies, which give you a good balance between the amount of raw power you can have and the size of the PSU itself without going down the road of external PSUs or trying to use some of those awkward rack-mounted ones that are just a nightmare to fit into any standard class enclosure. Now, for both of these, they've gone about it a slightly different way. Now, I've used that fancy little Allen key from earlier on that you're going to need, because we're going to need to remove some lids here between these 2 devices, because one major difference between these 2 devices is to do with the placement of that PSU. Now down here, we've already got installed that SFX power supply down there. If I remember right, it's an SFX 400 watt PSU inside this. And to save you the trouble before you're that guy, yes, I know it's the wrong way round, but we had to do that for the build because these cables are so darn short for this particular PSU. It's not ideal, but that's why. But save yourself writing down that comment. But did you notice something about this device? There is no PSU showing on the rear here. What you have is just the output cable there. And unlike this device that has kind of a standard placement for a tower to have an internal PSU that just slots in with the cable funneling through, this system does things slightly differently. On that rear panel there where we've got that power supplier, that feeds in to an internal power extension mains cable there. It's very well put together. It's a nice high quality angled cable as well. And that's because the SFX PSU lives in a block here at the top of the case. So rather than it being here at the rear to have all that vent, it lives here right in front of that front panel there. That means that its air is going to be pushing through the system, either out the sides of those vents on either side or funneling through the pinhole front or out the rear there with or without cooling fans. Now that PSU placement will mean that the order with which you install all of your components will have to be monitored and taken care of very carefully, because you may be in a position where when you've placed the components, the PSU going in sort of last but not is going to be awkward as all hell. Now we can see from the placement of the screw holes here for the installation of the ITX board that it's not overhanging that PSU at all, but they're very, very close together. So do bear that in mind during the installation, and particularly if you're someone that's mindful of replacing PSUs over time, because this finds a kind of awkward middle ground between an internal and an external PSU that will make replacing the PSU in this significantly harder once it's held in place around the cage.
Phenomenal cosmic powers!
Now the last 2 points in this video are definitely going to be geared towards those of you looking at pretty medium to high spec builds. Now this device over here that we built with the TopTon Celeron board, this point's not going to make any difference to you guys, because not only does it arrive with the heatsink for that CPU, the CPU heatsink or CPU fan already pre-installed, but it is an incredibly small height one there. You can barely make it out. But if you're looking at some of the higher end Ryzens or looking at some of the Intel Core, some stuff we're rocking out here in i3, i5, i7, even i9, those arrive with chunkier, or at least the requirements for chunkier heat sinks and CPU fans inside, and that is where the main core difference is. Because of this device's height and the maintenance of trying to be compact, you only have clearance for a CPU fan of up to 65mm. Now, there are plenty out there, and there are some that, you know, either have very tactically placed fans or a good combination and placement of copper piping that allow them to be much more compact but still remain highly efficient. However, if you are going to go again 11th, 12th, 13th gen i5, 7 or 9, you're going to need a chunky CPU heatsink there to collect the air and dissipate the heat as quickly as possible coming off that CPU. And that's why in the 8-bay model here, we have clearance of 130mm, which is significant compared with that of the N2, and will allow those much greedier CPUs that are more power hungry and therefore more overly reliant on the dissipation of heat to have those bigger CPU heat sinks and fans to dissipate that air. So if you're looking at these two and you're not thinking about the number of bays, but you're thinking about the CPU, just bear in mind that not only because of the fan placement and the vent placement is the N3 a better choice, but the very component that's going to be stopping your CPU from turning into a Pop-Tart is going to have more space to play with.
Phenomenal cosmic powers!
Carrying on the subject of having enough space to play with, if you are someone that's going for one of these builds and you're being very selective about the PCIe card that you're going to use, because remember, the majority of ITX motherboards, which is what you're going to need inside this, and with the exception of DTX boards, if you're going to be running that ITX board, in almost every single case, you're only going to have one PCIe slot to play with. That means the choice of upgrade expansion card you use in these systems, you only get one shot at it in most cases. Now, the reason I bring it up is because not only does this arrive with better support of taller CPU fans and heatsinks I mentioned earlier on, but on top of that, there is a better support of PCIe cards inside this system. Now, if we look at the N2, what we have is half height, and even on this TopTon board that only has a Gen 2x4 slot, because that of the CPU architecture, it's still not as tall, deep a box as that of the N3. The result is, if you want to use standard half-depth cards like this one, this is a 10GBE to 2 M.2 NVMe combo card, this will install inside this system. You have to make sure you're using the right backplane, but this will fit inside that system absolutely fine. But if you want to go bigger than that, if you want to go for a graphics card that may be 2 units deep, or you're going for a deeper card because it may have multiple M.2 NVMe slots there, you are in trouble. To put that into perspective, if you look at deeper cards, the majority of which you tend to find if you go to x8 or x16 will be longer cards for heat dissipation. This card, although you can get it in at the height level, it is simply too long for this case, and you'll end up with it clashing with the back cables, and you lose out on around about 1 to 2 centimeters to get a card like this installed. But moreover, if you want to go again for graphics cards which are going to be fatter, that's why the N3 has 2 PCIe slots here for you to take advantage of. Bear in mind, you can't use ATX motherboards in this, so you're not going to be able to use many motherboards that have got more than one PCIe slot to start with. Again, look up DTX cards. But what if you want to use a single profile card, but it's high, it's very tall, and it's very deep? This is a PCIe Gen 5 multi M.2 NVMe card here with 1 slot on the back, 2 on the front. There is absolutely no way, for a variety of reasons, that you can use this. It's too tall and it's too deep. Whereas on this system, it would fit absolutely sweet as a nut, with plenty of placement there at the back and the height for that card. So if you're already spending a great deal of time calculating which PCIe upgrades you're going to be utilizing in your more than likely one PCIe slot that your ITX MoBo is going to be running, then chances are, if you're going for the bigger, greedier cards with more potential to be utilized in your NAS, the N3 is going to be a better shout, because that extra space means better cards. It means combo cards, it means enhanced performance cards, and certainly if you're looking at times 16 cards, then you're going to find limitations in this casing for those bigger cards, especially if you're going to be using GPU pass-through for, say, a Plex transcoding enabled server, or for virtual machines or aggressive containers. But this has been the main differences between the Jonsbo N3 and the Jonsbo N2, which I've now turned the wrong way round. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Again, the build for the N3 will start as soon as all of the components arrive, and I'll keep you updated with the usual social posts and YouTube shorts, so stay tuned for those. But if you found this video helpful, do let me know in the comments. And also, there is a link in the description to recommended 250, 500 and 750 Nika builds for the N2, and 350, 550 and I think 750 or 850 Nika builds for the N3. Link below in the description, so do check that out, with different configuration choices and build-ups of components. Let me know if you've got recommendations or builds that you're already using, or maybe there's a point that I didn't cover in comparison to these two. If I missed one, let me know. There might be a follow-up video, who knows. But apart from that, if you need help with your custom build, you've got several options here on NAS Compares. Number one, you can go to the comments. Number two, the free advice section over on NAS Compares, the big blue button on the right hand side of the screen. Number three, the Discord. Number four, you can go to the community forum, Ask NAS Compares. Number five, head over to Ko-Fi or Patreon, where you can sign up for one of our membership tiers that not only allows you to have expedited support from myself and Eddie, but on top of that, access to content user polls, the private Discord group, and of course our monthly seminars where we talk all about data storage, different techniques, and answer your questions directly there on Zoom. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.